I won't read out what the mayor reads out, but if you're participating in the meeting, then you're agreeing to being broadcast if you speak on the council's YouTube channel. So welcome to this, the last meeting of standards and general purposes of this municipal year. Do we have apologies for absence? I'm aware of Councillor Wilson, who's joined us online, and Councillor Manley, who hopefully will be joining us online shortly as well. So they're both members of the committee and we have no substitutes for them. Is that right?
No,
they just chose to
participate.
Yes, but they do understand that they can't vote as an online participant. So other than that, we have everyone else here. Is that right? Oh, and the independent person counts, not councillor, Liz Jackson from EY can't be here in person, was planning to be here. Oh, independent member. This. Yeah, right. Okay. Sorry. Okay. No, you're very welcome to be here. It's because you were sitting over there on the edge. I didn't see you. Okay. So without further ado, then, no other apologies, we'll move on. There any declarations of pecuniary interest need to be made? Okay, that's fine. The minutes of the previous meeting, are they agreed as an accurate record?
I've got a question, but not a quibble.
Right.
Just that we did say last time that we would invite people who were non-compliant with the internal audit, hadn't done what they were supposed to do to be compliant with the internal audit. And I noticed we haven't done that, but is that still the plan? And we were going to invite people who hadn't done their priority one actions or over a long period of time.
Yes, that is still the plan. They were teed up to come to the meeting when it was scheduled for the 8th of March, and as it got moved to the state, and the head of internal audit was on a pre-booked annual leave to America, we've pushed it forward to the next meeting, but they will come then if their actions are still outstanding.
For that explanation, and I hope that our head of internal audit is enjoying a holiday, and she's not signed into the meeting. Okay, so is it everyone's wish that I sign the minutes? Yes, agreed. And it's the 27th. Amy, thank you. Right. So without further ado, we're moving on to the external audit for 21-22, which you're going to present to us or talk to us through. I'm pleased to say that we did get an underqualified audit report, and my thanks also because I was away on holiday at the time as well. So the Vice Chair, Councillor John Oliver, did sign on my behalf. So that's good. Thank you very much for that. Would you like to go ahead?
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, thank you to the Vice Chair for kind of enabling us to sign before my quality reviewer went on holiday for a few weeks. So yeah, this is the summary of the auditor's annual report, and it basically just summarises all the work undertaken on the 21-22 financial statements and value for money. So just to confirm, we signed I signed my auditor's report on the 7th of February 2023, and that was an unqualified opinion on the financial statements and an unqualified kind of unmodified opinion on your value for money. So everything was as it needs to be, and that's kind of the best audit report you can get, and that's the one you want to have. There were no kind of issues arising during our audit that needed to be needed to amend that audit report. Officers were really communicative and kind of supportive throughout the audit process. So that was kind of like a really good news story. There was nothing ongoing concern or anything that I needed to bring to your attention. I wasn't going to go through the report in detail because it is quite a lengthy report. For those for the audit of financial statements for both the council and the pension fund, they are all around the financial statements, the significant risks work. They've all been reported previously to you in the last audit committee in the auditor's results report. And I think I went through all of those in great detail. So I won't go through again, but obviously I can answer questions at the end if you've got anything on them. But that is just kind of a cut and paste as such from those two documents. And then we move on to the value for money. And obviously you'll be pleased to read that in kind of the more trying kind of financial circumstances that the public sector finds itself in, we didn't actually identify any risks of significant weakness in your arrangements. And just to kind of remind everyone in here, because it's quite a complicated thing, and I often get asked, what are you saying about our value for money? We're looking at the arrangements in place at the council to underpin your kind of ensuring you give value for money across the financial sustainability, across all your governance arrangements, and then how you improve the economy, efficiency and effectiveness for kind of everyone living and kind of working in the Merton area. So our work identified that there were no weaknesses in those arrangements, and officers kind of were operating as we expected them to do. You have all your policies and procedures, and your governance arrangements are set up in a way that they should be. So there was no weaknesses identified in that. And then the rest of the report sets out kind of just our findings in those areas and kind of against each of the sub criteria for those 3 high level areas, kind of the findings against them. And then really just to draw your attention to, just kind of get into it, sorry, draw your attention to really Appendix C, around the kind of the fees and the safeguarding. Obviously we've set the fees out there. We've got to be confirmed the total final audit fee. We have to do what we call a scale fee kind of rebasing. So that looks at what your audit fee is for the year, as agreed by PSAA, and then we look at the cost of the audit to undertake it. I think obviously over the past few years we've all noticed, and you can see from here, your scale fee is around £110,000 and your final fee for 2021 was around £210,000. We're just currently looking and finalising all that now. We've concluded all that work and we're going to put a submission into PSAA on it. Your finance team we agree to disagree on that, and then we ask PSAA to be our arbitrator, and that will be being undertaken shortly to kind of have a meeting with officers to discuss that final fee and then present it to PSAA for their approval. And then just to flag that we do 2 pieces of non-audit work that one relates to 21-22 that we undertake the teachers' pension return on behalf of the council as well. And then just there's a note there to say that we no longer do the housing benefit claim. That will be in 21-22 done by another auditor. And then we just say if they've got any questions around anything that's in the report.
Thank you for taking us through that. In fact, yes, my recollection is we had everything. The only thing that was outstanding last time was the confirmation of the valuation of infrastructure. And that was the reason we didn't have the signed letter previously. So that was the only addition, and that all went smoothly. I understand that there are not many councils that have signed off their accounts yet.
No, there isn't, Chair. There was another national issue. So if everyone remembered, obviously, as you say, Chair, last time I couldn't sign because of infrastructure impacting across all local government audits with infrastructure assets. And that obviously impacted you. And then we signed in February. In March, it was identified that there is a triennial valuation on the pension fund. So luckily we'd signed your pension fund along with your council, and therefore you were kind of exempt from the issue. But I've not signed any further audit reports since this one in February 23. And we're not looking at signing any soon. I think it's probably going to be end of May, early June before we start signing 21-22. And that's because there's additional work being done at every local government body, regardless of its size, that obviously has the IS19 and that underpins all your local government pension scheme figures in the financial statements of the council. And that because of the triennial valuation, which is a 3-year full valuation by the actuary of your pension fund, that is leading to material differences in all audited bodies, and therefore accounts are having to be restated and additional audit work is being done. So you are still one of the only councils pretty much in the country that is signed at this state for 21-22 in local government.
Thank you for that. That's encouraging. Are there any questions of this? Well, is there something you'd like to add to?
No, let's.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment. Yeah, we are really fortunate for the accounts to be signed because now we are with the clean, we are going to the next financial year. We'll be in the process of doing the draft account. So it's nice that we have signed the 21-22 accounts. And so no audit, any qualification, anything that we need to consider. So we are in a very good position to go into the next financial year, closing down and working to it. So I just want to use this opportunity to thank the team and everybody who worked on this account. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. How many councils we've signed off? So out of how many councils? Roughly.
For about, I think we have 120 audit opinions to sign for 21-22 as EY. So there is a very small percentage in this country of audits that are actually signed for 21-22 because of the infrastructure and then now the IS19 and other delays that some audits aren't starting until much later. So I've not started a couple of my smaller bodies who are 21-22 because of the timing of those audits.
Roughly. How many
roughly-
are there? All councils?
Oh, there's about 350.
So we're.
Yeah.
So of 350, we're in the what?
Oh, very small percentage. Do you know the numbers?
Eh?
In just a rough idea, 1 in 5 audits signed, so 1 in 4 are outstanding. So just the rough idea I can give about. If I'm right, there's about 467 audits, something like in total, the district plus the upper tier audits. So in overall, only 1/5 of the audits signed as at April for 21-22. And please note, some of the council, I know the other public sector have previous years audits outstanding as well, not only the 21-22. So on that note, Merton is in a very good position, even though we signed a bit later. We don't have any previous audits outstanding and we have signed it and going clean for the next closed up.
So we're in the top 20% of 450, yeah? Thanks. Thank
Yes,
you
Yeah.
I agree, yeah.
very much.
John, you had some questions.
Okay, just a couple of little points. Starting at the beginning of your thing, I mean, just on where it says valuation of land and buildings, you see you repeat a sentence there. You've got a sentence that starts management is required. You did that twice. I don't know if you can edit that. I just wanted to ask you where it says national non-domestic rates, it says we reviewed the assumptions. Normally you say we are satisfied, we think it's okay. You just say here we reviewed. So should you not say we think it's all right?
Yes, that's actually a very valid point. We say we review the assumptions, and because then there's like the absence of, and there were any issues with them, that's our conclusion that they were okay, and that nothing was done. But if I can amend that report to include
So you
it.
said it was okay, not just that you
Yeah,
reviewed,
that's fine.
reviewed it and then put the towel back over your head. Page 20, the thing about committee structure, I just wanted to check with you. This is on page 20. My page numbers probably aren't the same as yours, so, but it's much further on and it just says the council has a committee structure to allow it to make informed decisions. And I wondered if that was right, because some councils do have a committee structure and they make the decisions through committees, but we have a cabinet. I wondered if there was an error there or if that was what you meant to say.
We meant to say that in the fact that we just call it kind of a committee structure, in the fact that you have cabinet and then kind of sub scrutiny functions that and support. So for that, it's just
These are
more the
support-
phrase that we use, that you have a governance
Alright,
structure in place.
And then the other thing, final thing was on page 27. I think this is where in the pension fund ones, your notes are the wrong notes. Your notes are the notes for the main audit. So it says, for example, fee of 99,000 in the pension one. Yeah, so you just need to change those.
Apologies, that is an error of me.
Thank you, John, for spotting those bits that this was overlooked
OCD comes in handy sometimes.
and being an accountant too.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. If there are no other questions, the report is for noting, and thank you for what you've achieved in getting us in over the line ahead of many other councils. We're going to go on to talk about the external audit plan for the coming year. And maybe touch, I know that the fees are subject to debate, and that's always been the one thing that the previous chair said to me is always keep on about the fees. So I remember that, and I'll pass that on to any other one, if there's new chairs in the future. But what can we do to put pressure to try and, because it's set by the PSSA. So as a committee, could we write to them expressing our concern at the rise in the fee, because it's more than 100% increase.
Yeah, so PSCA do set the scale base fee. And then we obviously calculate, as I said, the cost of the audit, and then we put a submission to them to say this is all the additional risks and work that we do around this. This is then the cost of the audit. They then determine part of it. So for last year, they determined an extra £99,000. The actual additional cost of the audit was 143 that we submitted. And then they said, no, you can have 99. So that's kind of the arbitration that they do. I think it's pretty worth noting. So 22-23 is the last year under the kind of current PSCA fee arrangement. And then from 23-24, PSCA have kind of put on publicly on their website, obviously as part of the retender process, the fees have increased on average by around 150% of what they were. So obviously where your fee was roughly £110,000, that is obviously increasing on average across the countries. We don't know where they are yet. We don't have the final fees for 23-24, but then your fee will come out at around 150% more than that. So we're kind of expecting significant increases in that tender process for 23-24. So I think the answer is yes, always right, always lobby. Officers do disagree with the fees, so they don't agree the 143. They don't really agree with the 99. Roger and Namashi still gave me a hard time when that and to get that invoiced, obviously. But it's always worth writing. I think Roger does. So, yeah.
We will do that for sure. And I'm not necessarily going to put the words together, but I'm sure there are officers here who can put something together very eloquent.
They do challenge well on your behalf, I can assure you.
Okay, thank you. Well, so we note the audit report for 21-22, and maybe you could take us through the plans for 22-23 now.
So they're quite short reports, so they're not our full audit plans. So these are our outline audit plans, as I've termed them, and we're setting out the materiality, which is based on the kind of the audited 21-22 financial statements at this stage, because your officers are working very, very hard to prepare the 22-23 accounts kind of as we sit here. So the accounts materiality is based on kind of the audited accounts, and that sits at around 10.4 million for the group planning materiality as we as known, and we will update those figures once we have the draft group accounts for 22-23. Then those figures will be updated and we'll issue you our full audit plan. It has to be an outline audit plan because we haven't yet started the 22-23 year, but officers asked us to bring something to you to kind of just give you an early heads up on the risks that we've identified to date. For those that are kind of eagle-eyed, they are the same as obviously that are in the auditor's annual report. So we're aware of obviously what is going on at your organisation. We have kept the focus of all those risks for the council the same, bar the infrastructure. We said obviously in 21-22, because it was a new area of accounting and a new area of focus, it was a significant risk. We've said we don't think it needs that profile because we know that your accounts, we obviously signed them off and they were correct, the final version that we did. Therefore, we've decreased the risk to be inherent. And that's just to ensure that we do some enhanced audit procedures in that area, just to make sure kind of everything that we agreed in 21-22 is kind of worked out in practice during the 22-23 year. But then there's been another area of it was an inherent risk last year around going concern, but actually as we've moved further and further away from COVID, actually your financial position is a very healthy one for the 22-23 year, and therefore we've changed that from being an inherent risk just to an area of focus. And that means because it's going concern, we always look at it regardless of the organisation, and that's just to say that we are still auditing it, but we've got the less. We don't think you have any going concern issues is kind of what that's indicating to you. We haven't undertaken any value for money planning work yet, but so we've just flagged one area that we obviously will be looking at is obviously the sale of your subsidiary that happened within the 22-23 year. We've obviously had discussions at the top, that point of the sale, and discussed kind of the process and the governance that was ongoing at that time, but it will just be that we'll do kind of make sure that is all documented and written down as it needs to be and reflect it back to you. I don't have any specific concerns right now about that sale. If not, obviously I would have spoken to officers, or through you, Chair, I would have spoken to you at that point in time before the sale went through. But it's just obviously you'll recognise it's such a significant transaction that will be in your financial statements and such a significant kind of sale that we therefore do need to pay some form of attention to it. And that's all really I was going to say on that one. Obviously the fees, sorry. So I was going to say, I wasn't really going to say anything more specific on the fees as they currently stand. They are just what we think is the cost of the audit to undertake the Merton audit, which is £243,000. And then obviously as the audit on goes, we'll then determine the exact fee that it will be. The only other thing that's probably worth mentioning, which isn't written in here, is also the timeline, because I know officers have had a discussion with you, Chair, and to kind of be transparent to sit here today. The timeline for the audit. So the statutory deadline for the 22-23 year is for you to prepare your financial statements by the 31st of May 23, and for me to issue my audit report by the 30th of September. We've had multiple discussions with the accounts team around the timing of that audit, and we've written a letter from EY to all audited bodies across the country explaining the difficulties we've got in kind of undertaking those audits. Obviously the delay of signing off the 21-22 audits that are still ongoing and likely to go into June, July this year means we are unable to start audits in as timely a manner as we would wish. So your audit will be starting in October 23. So your I was going to say Director of Finance, but effectively your Director of Finance has displayed upset at that, has challenged me heavily on it, and we've been asked a lot to move the audit forward. I'm afraid my resourcing timetable doesn't allow us to do so. So we'll be starting in October 23 and then bringing the report to you by the end of that 22-23 year, with either the aim to sign pre-Christmas or in early January. So I think I said that I'd like it to be before the 7th of February, so at least I beat that I've done it earlier. I know that is disappointing to officers particularly, but obviously through you as the committee as well. I think that timetable, we're not starting many audits in the summer. A handful of audits across the country will be starting in the summer. Officers have expressed that they would like Merton to be one of those. We are debating as to where that sits, and it depends if anything kind of doesn't get signed that's due to be signed soon, if we can move around the timetable. But at the minute, I've said I'd rather report to you, it'll be October at my kind of, which is what I know at this time. And then if anything changes, I can come back to you with better news. And I'll pause there.
Thank you. As you said, I've been told already that that's the sort of timeline. I've got a couple of questions around that. Is that one, we certainly would not want it earlier than last year's, because that shows a catch up and improvement on that. But when whether it was the case before COVID or not, I don't know, but certainly now it's all done remotely, or most of the work is done remotely. So are there no resources within the EY network that could be deployed to at least start some of the initial work? And I appreciate that might mean that it's offshore because you're an international company. But the days of being issued with your purple or green pen, as I was at EY many years ago, and going out and ticking everything, are gone. So it's electronic and remote. So is there anything you can deploy there to start it?
We do use overseas resource. We use a team from Calcutta across the kind of government public sector audits. We try not to use too many, if we're being honest, because actually the government public sector accounts, your financial statements, they do have some quirks and peculiarities in them, which then we don't always get the highest quality work that we need when using people who are working so remotely. So we take the point, we are looking at it, we are looking at the resourcing. I think it's about ensuring that we start audits and finish them is what we've tried to do. So then we can get on a decent track. Whereas at the minute we now have, well, as I said, hundreds of audits open that aren't closed down. And actually that's just not helpful for us to kind of focus on audits and close them down and move on. So the idea is that we do a much stricter timetable where you come in, you complete and you move on. And I'm afraid that is October. I think we are looking at resourcing and how to do things differently. I think the good news is, which I don't know if I mentioned last time, is that when EY tendered for the new 23-24 contract, we have about 30% of the market currently, and we tendered for 20% of the market because we didn't want more than 20%. We got asked to do more as a firm, and we've said no, that we can deliver 20%. We have the resources to deliver 20%. We are recruiting still, but there is a time lag on obviously people coming into the business. And therefore we will be set that we can deliver things in a much more timely, within deadlines over the summer as people would wish with the portfolio that we'll have going forward.
Any questions?
Yeah, one sort of observation and then one sort of question. So, I mean, I guess the message to us is that the audit will be later and more expensive together this year than last year, which isn't really a great advert for the service. I want to ask about what controls testing you'll do over the course of the year.
We have a fully substantive audit. So we don't do controls testing. We do it at some of our kind of corporate company audits, but we don't find it to be efficient in the public sector. We have explored it previously, but it didn't lead to kind of a control environment that was as robust as we would need to. And that's not saying there's any issues at Merton. It's just that because of the nature of local government accounts, where there are so many manual things done within the accounts, the controls testing wasn't giving us the full assurance we needed, and we found we were still doing substantive top up at year end, and the sample sizes weren't that different, so it wasn't efficient and effective as we need to be.
Councillor McCauley.
I think mine is a point of clarification. On the annual governance statement, you know, where there is your planning has obviously has you know, identified a risk of significant or additional weakness. What precautions do you take to determine, you know, where this is coming from?
So we do a detailed risk assessment looking at lots of the documents, not only the annual governance statement, through meetings with officers, obviously attending committee meetings, reviewing all the minutes, kind of just what we know about the council from kind of the press and wider media, as well as kind of building in. And then that gives me is there a risk of significant weakness that would change my value for money kind of reporting overall? Usually often it's around financial sustainability. So our councils, do you have sufficient resources? Are you managing them in the most effective way to manage it? That obviously isn't an issue at Merton, but you'll be well aware there are issues kind of across the public sector where that is an issue at councils, and obviously within the NHS in a much greater way. So I think we take in all the knowledge that we have. We do a detailed risk assessment that documents every kind of source of evidence that you have. All of our we triangulate that and then say, actually, we think this could lead to a risk. So for the example where we've got obviously the sale of Chas 2013 Limited, that is around, at the minute, we've got it as an area of focus, and we haven't yet said it's a risk of significant weakness, because we're going to do some initial work around it. If we think there's anything that is worrying in the governance arrangements around that sale, then that would lead me to do a detailed project, usually getting in probably an expert who is an expert in due diligence and governance and all of that. And then that would then lead to either me saying, no, it's fine, your arrangements are robust, or actually, no, there are weaknesses in how the council went about it. We've got it as an area of focus so far because we had a number of meetings around that time with officers around the sale. We're aware of what happened with the governance and everything underpinning it. So therefore, at this stage, there is no risk of significant weakness, but it's obviously would be remiss of me not to look at it at all.
One question. Earlier, I asked you about your comment about the national non-domestic rates. And since you said that everything was fine, I wondered if it was really necessary to do that all again the following year. Could you not just say, well, actually, they've got a good process. We checked it in detail last year and saved some money?
It's because it's a significant accountant estimate. So because it's not an actual figure that you have in your accounts, it's a judgment made by management based on a number of factors and determining kind of reports and analysis. And they make judgments over the percentages that are used and why. It is then a highly material figure in the accounts. So any accountant estimate automatically is kind of an inherent risk. It's then, if it's particularly risky, so say the PPE valuation, and then that is elevated to be a significant risk. But so we're saying it's a risk because it's a judgment and an estimate. It's not so risky that we think it's going to be so wrong. It needs to be a significant risk and have a substantial amount of work done.
But just to kind of press you on that, I mean, if the assumptions used are the same as last year, is there any reason to go through it again?
It is because we need to determine whether your kind of what underpins that is then the assumption should be the same. So it's then we get management to document their judgment as to why, if all those assumptions are exactly the same and the figures the same, and they say, well, you don't need to change that figure at all, and the provision is acceptable, what is it that they base that on that makes 22-23 exactly the same as 21-22 within the national domestic rates? And they're obviously there's lots and lots and lots underpinning the NNDR, which makes it kind of more complex. Things change on an annual basis around the appeals and how many people are appealing and the likelihood of success. Whereas you might have had one that came in that was hugely successful, and that then may be like, oh, actually, we're more confident in what we're doing, and therefore we can decrease the provision and change how we do it. So it changes every year. Sometimes it changes significantly, and other times take a point that actually there's only a minimal change to it. And therefore we would keep it as a risk, but we wouldn't do a significant amount of work. Whereas say when we get your 22-23 accounts, you doubled your provision, that would then probably indicate to me that I needed to increase that inherent risk to a significant risk and do a substantial amount of work and a lot more detailed testing on it.
So thank you for those answers. I think that we're asked to just note it, I think, aren't we? So is that noted? Thank you very much. I realise now we're moving on to the internal audit plan, and there are one or two new faces to members of the committee, and I didn't ask all officers to introduce themselves, and for members to do that at that point. Maybe I should have done that, because I know that Kevin's here covering the brief of Margaret. So could I ask those present perhaps to introduce themselves? So Kevin, you're going to just speak now, but also, oh, maybe it's.
Yeah, hello. My name's Kevin Holland. I head up the Shared Fraud Partnership. I've been to this committee in the past, but I'm here today as well because Mark Cullerton, your head of audit, isn't here. So I'll be bringing the internal audit papers to you, or presenting them to you.
All right, okay. Nimashi Swayogan, the Deputy Section 1 Officer covering for Roger Kirsch at the meeting.
Right. Okay, so we can go ahead with the internal audit plan.
Right. Thank you, Chair. So this paper, it's one that presents the charter, strategy and plan. The public sector internal audit standards requires the Internal Service to establish and periodically review an audit charter that is improved by those responsible for governance. So this charter and strategy we bring to this committee on an annual basis for approval. The charter itself, that formally describes the purpose, authority and principal responsibilities of your internal audit service and the scope of the work that's undertaken by the internal audit. It complies with the mandatory requirements that's set out under the public sector internal audit standards, and the accompanying strategy is designed to deliver the requirements outlined in the charter. So the purpose of internal audit is to provide independent and objective assurance to the council, its members, the senior leadership team, and in particular the authority section 151 officer, in helping them discharge their responsibilities relating to the proper administration of the council's financial affairs. In carrying out our duties and responsibilities, internal audit has full and unrestricted access to all council's activities, records, assets and property, which we consider to be necessary to properly fulfil the internal audit function and deliver the annual plan. The head of audit is then required and will provide the council with an annual opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness on the internal control system. In terms of the plan itself, that's included for 23-24, found on pages 66-68. This has been established in line with the strategy, and in producing it, we've considered the issues that have been identified through the annual governance statement and action plan. And new for 23-24, we've had additional meetings with at an assistant director level, in addition to discussions with the council's departmental management teams and directors. The CMT itself have completed a risk assessment rating for each audit as part of this the strategic annual plan. And we also would look at the corporate risk registers and risk returns that are produced by the authority to determine what are the highest priorities or highest need areas for audit focus. So the plan itself, we would look to focus our time and resource on the high and medium risks first. But the plan itself has to remain and have some flexibility, because of course during any year new or change requirements might arise, and we need to be able to potentially shift planned items of a lower risk to a future year in order to accommodate if there are some more significant emerging risks. I'm happy to take questions or try and answer the questions on the charter, strategy and plan.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions? What's the page?
Yes, I had one. As part of our, where the council spends money, we give quite significant grants to sort of external parties, community organisations, etc. And I was wondering if you did any either sort of value for money reviews, or alternatively sort of checking that they are they're using that money as intended and delivering the outcomes requested through the course of the year. I know there's something about grants, but it didn't seem to bring up that point.
Without being part of the detail of producing this plan, what I can say is that the role of internal audit, we're not the first line responsibility for making sure the grants are delivered. So who they're given to, they deliver the requirements as intended. So that will be part of the service departments. But what we would do is make sure that their arrangements, their framework for actually checking that the councillors achieved effective value out of the funds that are provided, that framework is sufficient to be able to flag any concerns, so that if funds weren't being used appropriately, they would be raised and challenged, and therefore action could be taken.
Okay, and is that are those sort of control testing, is that in the plan for the year ahead?
You mentioned that there is an audit in there for grants funding. The detail of what controls are going to be looked at is something that I would say I'm not privy to. I could find out, but what happens at the start of any audit, the grants, obviously it's a wide area. We would look through our initial scoping meetings to try and, much like our colleague next door have said, try and find out the areas of focus where we could get maximum benefit for the authority at the time that's put in. So if there were issues that we felt that the monitoring arrangements were not sufficient, then we have the potential to have a look at that a bit further on a sample basis and potentially go out or do some sort of on the ground testing of those organisations. What actually happens is something that will be determined during that scoping phase.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. Could I request that we sort of that we get? Could I request a bit of follow up from the team on that point about how they go about it and how they'll scope that work? I just think for us as a council, it's really important we use community bodies to deliver some of our services, but then that comes at significant sort of risk to the council that those that you know, those funds are used appropriately. So I think it would be really helpful to sort of set that out, how we go about that and how we ensure that sort of our taxpayers' money is well spent.
Is that feasible? I mean, it's also, I would think, be the department that's grant giving as well that would be part of that process.
So that's where I think that the monitoring side will be the service committees looking at what's been delivered rather than the audit committee. Oh, so not the audit committee, what you should be interested here is that there is an effective governance control arrangement around it. So the work of internal audit would be a bit more generic rather than actually saying, we would be able to say that there is a framework in place that the work that the money's been provided is being put to good use, or if it's not being put to good use, it should be detected and raised.
Yeah. So what I'm interested in is what internal audit's view is of those frameworks. So whether internal audit is satisfied the operational areas have the right frameworks in place to monitor that funding.
Perhaps I can come in. So I suppose there are a number of things at play here. There are some grants, as you rightly identified, some actions in the forthcoming audit plan, as you rightly identified, to look at how we do signing off of grant claims. And when those audits are done, they will be reported here. And if there were to be anything that were amiss, that would be they would categorise the actions by reference to priority 1, 2, 3. So that will come to you. I think what you might be asking for is something a bit more detailed than just signing off the grant.
Yeah, because that's the money going out.
Yeah, it's the assurance
which is fine. How do we know that once we've given the money over, how do the areas follow up and ensure that the money is then, the grant delivers what we want the grant to deliver?
Which is probably a different, slightly different audit, I think. And if you're asking us to consider whether we could include an audit on that this year, because we won't be able to report back unless we audit it. But if you wanted the head of internal audit to include in her audit plan something around how we make sure we get value for money, as opposed to make sure that there's no fraudulent claims, which are different things, aren't they? We can ask her, we can certainly, if that was the committee's wish, ask her to consider including that in the audit plan for this year. Yeah,
particularly as in the budget approved at last council, there was a decision to put more money, into grants, particularly on the public health side. So I think it would be really useful if we could include that in the audit plan for this year, that they were really comfortable with the frameworks to follow up that the operational areas do. And if internal audit could look at that, I would be very grateful.
And if that's the wish of the committee, I will take it back and ask Margaret Cullerton to give you a scope for what that might mean. It might mean some of the other things on the list need to get pushed back. So we'll certainly bring you back. Or we could, given we don't meet to July, perhaps we'll circulate that virtually if that's what the committee want.
Or is that agreed that we want to have that?
I think so.
Well, let's take some other comments. I've got Councillor Macaulay, and I've noticed Councillor Wilson's got a hand up. I hope that's not from a previous item. As for now, okay, that's good. So I'll take Councillor Macaulay first, and I'll come to you, Councillor Wilson, and then Councillor.
I think it's the protocol for audit reviews is very important. What I need to know and confirmation is whether, if the reviews take place, whether changes can be implemented or whether additional information can be added to the reviews.
So as in general terms, so if there's an audit review completed, recommendations are made and those are reported through this committee. The priority ratings for all the different recommendations, the high priority ones are the ones that should draw attention from governance and from management. So those will be brought to you. Those recommendations are there to make sure the service delivers at the best possible level it can. So yes, that should be a driver for change if change is needed.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. I just had a question regarding the schools audits. The committee was separately circulated a list or the schedule of when each school has last been audited and when it's due to be audited again. I just noticed within that there are a number of schools that had received limited assurance, but the cycle for their next audit was exactly the same as those who'd received substantive assurance. So I just wanted to ask why those schools with limited assurance, why it's not brought forward, why they're not on a sort of shorter cycle, just to check in again more frequently.
Thank you.
I think the first part to answer that would be that without booking in another audit, there is closer scrutiny because being a limited assurance audit, there is more follow-up work done to make sure that the whatever was recommended is not only a one-off change, but it's properly embedded. So that itself creates an extra piece of work. But outside of that, and I'm afraid I didn't have that knowledge of the plan or that list as to why they are at whatever periodic cycle they're on. But my understanding would be that if we had sufficient concerns that the school was not able to properly address some significant concerns, then the frequency of visits would be increased. We wouldn't just say, oh, sorry, we can't do another audit because if there's a clear need to go in and do further work, then that becomes a priority item. And that's a sort of item that means that with the finite resources we have in the audit plan, we might have to say, well, ideally we would like to have done school A, but because of the school B's concerns, school A will have to slip back a bit further so we could balance those resources.
Does that answer your question? Awesome. Thank you. Councillor Aswar.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I know from working with the ward allocation scheme that the community groups that got the funding from the council for that had to submit a report by March to show how they had spent the money that was given to them. So the council is aware that the money is being spent on the right things. So I imagine that that is something that is done with all the other community groups that get funding from the council. Is that right?
The exact detail I don't know. It is what I would expect to be there, and that's the sort of thing we would look for in an audit, in terms of that's the framework of control in place, that not only there's a request or a requirement for some feedback, but it's appropriately reviewed. And I think that addresses both concerns in terms of we're saying the governance arrangements, they are sufficiently robust that if there were any inappropriate use or misuse or underuse of it, that it has that chance of being properly detected and action then taken to either change how it's funded or make sure those funds, make sure the services that are being funded by that are properly delivered.
Councillor Oliver, yeah.
Right. I've got a couple of small questions. One, in the finance and digital section, it says client financial affairs, review of administration of scheme. What is that?
I can help on that one.
Sorry,
Councillor Oliver,
just find it.
Well, yeah, anyway.
Sorry, could you repeat which? So I've just finance and digital.
I think
Yes.
the monitoring officer can answer it actually, so
Right.
please go ahead.
So for clients who lack a certain amount of capacity, so it's generally elderly people or people with learning disabilities, the council occasionally acts on their behalf to look after their affairs. And so it's the audit process for how we ensure that their money is properly
All right,
looked
so
after.
we're like quarter protection type stuff. Okay, next one. What does MSJCB stand for? Start for 10. Ah, okay, Joint Cemetery Board, thank you very much. And then just to clarify, all these pages at the end where it says management response, target date, just to be clear, these are all things that are not done yet, is that right?
On which page?
So on my thing, but my page number is a bit different. It's like at the very last part of the paper, it's got Appendix B. And it lists a whole lot of stuff and it's got a date against each one. And I just wanted to, some of the dates are in the past, like December 2022. So I just wanted to check, are these things that are still outstanding or were they done on time?
So, sorry, that's should be an apology I should have come up with, mentioned earlier on. They're not in my copy. I don't think they're in the published documents anymore. There was a mistake publishing those. And I think that's more where you get the annual report, which shows what's outstanding. And with your earlier comment when you said about having departmental representatives to be present to answer if there are things which are overdue outstanding, I think that's a point that's going to come to this committee in its next cycle. And I think those appendices which were produced were put out in draft, and therefore they have outdated information in them.
Oh. Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, thank you.
It's
Again, if I can elucidate, so the paper from Margaret Cullerton with the outcome of last year's audit plans and the priority actions was due to come today. It's moved to July because the change of date, but inadvertently the paper still got published, and in some of your versions it was retracted in time, and in others you got the old version. So many apologies for that confusion.
Yes. Okay. So we'll get, yes, I was confused from over there because I was looking at your page. No, you can see it, but it's just not being considered today. Right. Okay. Thank you very much on that then. So do we need to note the draft audit? No, yes, the internal audit plan. We're noting it. Agreed? Okay. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, to keep interrupting. Do you want me to go away to
Oh, yes, the
add in that or either add in a new audit on the monitoring arrangements for voluntary sector grants, or to expand the existing audit plan for grant claims to cover that value for money type assessment that has been discussed?
I would think there needs to be a threshold in that, because there'll be some small grants, not to say that we shouldn't be monitoring closely small grants as well, but you know, there's a materiality element here.
It's not so much to do the grants themselves, but it's to check that all the areas giving out grants have an appropriate framework in place to follow up on the grants they give out.
Yeah.
If I could, that's something that would have to be discussed with Margaret Cullerton, because the plan itself is full, and what she would want to look at is if we were to take on something new, what are we going to suggest should be given up? And is that something that members would prefer, that the grant side is done ahead of something else that might have to wait or be delayed?
Maybe that could come back to the next committee of what that is, but it's some of it may be about asking what assurance the departments get of whether the work has been delivered. So it may not be a lot of work necessarily for internal audit as I'm reading it. It could be the grant giving department who will be doing that monitoring.
Yes, so I think the point of the audit is to ensure that they're doing what they are doing. So if you're happy for me to take it away to Margaret Cullerton to come back with a suggested scope and the implications of doing that in terms of anything else that might need to be shunted back because we're doing that, then I can take that away as an action if that's what members want.
Okay, so with that proviso, we agree the plan. Okay, thank you. The next item is 7, is to review 2 policies. So whistleblowing and anti-money laundering policies. These are presumably policies that we would want to have in place or are required to have in place as well. So
already have in place, but just need updating.
Yes. Well, one said implement and the other one said review. So the whistleblowing policy is actually a review, not an implementation. Is that right?
Both policies are already in existence, so these both will be reviewed. So I apologise for the wording if that's inappropriate. And it's just if a very brief introduction of these, that they're policies that just to help the council with protecting public funds and both policies are being reviewed to make sure that they remain current and aid with, and by bringing them through to this committee, that sort of assists with promoting those policies across the council. The whistleblowing policy itself, the review of that came out that it was effectively robust. There are a few minor changes, and those are mentioned paragraph 2.2, and that's page 79 of my pack. And then on the anti-money laundering policy, there's been some refresh of the regulations, and one of the key drivers out of that is that organisations are now supposed to carry out their own risk assessment to see how they might be prone to money laundering. And so it's a bit of a risk review to be done, and that's the main addition or revision to that particular policy.
These will be reviewed again in 3 years' time.
Yes, unless there are significant changes, and then we'll bring them back sooner to you.
Are there any questions on either of those?
Just as a matter of interest, in point 6.3, it refers to a hotline for whistleblowing. Just wondering who picks that up and deals with that particular issue on that hotline.
So I believe that one goes through to internal audit, but that's something we can check and come back to you on.
Sorry, I think, are you talking about paragraph 11.2?
No, 6.3. The whistleblowing.
Page 87, 6.3.
Yeah. Two hotlines, one's the national one, and one's
Sorry.
our internal one. That is internal audit.
No, I apologise for that. It's not. The number that's quoted there is actually the fraud hotline. I've just noticed it now, and it is one of mine. So, whistleblowing, it could be fraud, it could be health and safety and safeguarding issues, but that number is actually the group hunt number for the fraud service.
So does that need to be amended, or is that the right number?
I think that's the right number in terms of it, because most of the whistleblowers are of financial concerns, which whilst they may come through to us, there is a triage process where I will come back to Louise Round, and we will assess and decide what action should be taken on any whistleblower that's come through.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, the other question I have is if this is an amendment to policy, how is this communicated to the staff?
That is a very good question. If it's approved, we would put it out through it's on the hub, which is the staff internal IT, intranet, and we can also add it into our weekly Pulse employee newsletter to let people know it's been amended. It's already on the hub. So this is a sort of technical change, really, but yes, it's a good challenge. We should recirculate it once it's been agreed.
There we go. Only that in 3.2 it talks about the policy applies to contractors working for the council and partner agencies. So it would need to be communicated to them as well.
Okay. Are the two policies agreed then? Great, thank you. Now we move on to item 9. 8. Fraud update report. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. There's just a few points I would like to just point out to members on this report. So initially, I would point members to section 2, where paragraphs 2.1 to 2.7. I think previously I've probably mentioned that fraud hadn't sort of been changed or been rising through the COVID period. It only changed in its vehicle what the fraudster used. We've had feedback now from some national studies on this, and that's no longer true. We've now got the evidence that there has been a substantial rise in the incidence of fraud. Fraud is now the single largest reported crime to the police. Whilst these studies are commissioned by the finance and insurance sectors, we show that from past experience, those trends are effectively mirrored across the public sector. We just don't have an equivalent survey ourselves to be able to use. And even with the new public sector fraud authority, their own estimates for the public sector pre-COVID, I think they stood at something like 33 billion. And I think post-COVID, that's risen up to 52 billion, excluding any COVID grant funding. So what the consequences of that is that in terms of the indicative plan I put in there, I have increased the amount of time that I'm setting aside under the fraud prevention areas, because if fraud is rising at level, we can no longer be able to investigate our way out of fraud. We've got to see whether we can do more to prevent fraud occurring at the outset. And I think there's just one other area I wanted to explain to members, and that's for table 3 on page 105. These are some of the key measures for my service. One of those, it is about housing properties recovered. Whilst Merton Council doesn't have its own housing stock, the value and the savings that are used on this are based around the cost of people who are placed in temporary accommodation. And of course, that cost is a cost to the revenue fund. So the reason why our numbers are low down there on the first one on the recovered property side is that the main social housing provider for this authority, they had issues internally, which meant that we weren't able to progress our cases or progress fraud work. And whilst that is now believed ended or much resolved, we are only just started to get back in there. So what you've got there is details where we've got 7 more cases that have been progressed through legal for recovery. But we are still having to do a fair bit of work to restore our working practices and approaches that we had with this main social housing provider, getting it back to their pre-incident levels.
Councillor Wilson.
Obviously, that's of considerable concern, given obviously the limited amount of stock that is available, but clearly we do have 100% nomination rights, both to Clarion and to Moat Housing over in Pollard's Hill. What was the primary reason behind this? Was it to do with their IT issues that they had for a number of months?
It was, yes, and how their resources were redirected internally. Yes.
Yeah, and was that taken up at a senior level with Clarion? Was that taken up at senior level with Clarion?
Yes, and it's something we've pushed through. We are now getting back to where we were in terms of working with them and making sure that where issues are identified, they're actually addressed and followed through. So if there's a need to recover property, action is being taken.
Thank you.
Is there not any penalty system for this? I mean, they've got their Clarion, I think we're talking about, yeah. In terms of the delay, do we not? Do they not get a financial hit, or they just say we've got problems and that's it?
I'm not aware of any sort of particular penalty that could be imposed upon them directly for this. What they have gone through has it has cost them a lot to actually deal with and address, but I don't think there's anything that we can directly do or impose upon them.
Can I come back? Yeah, I don't quite understand this because this company is independent, yeah, of us, of the council. There's, for whatever reasons, there's a delay, and we have to just, what do you say nowadays, suck it up. I think this needs to be looked at. It doesn't seem right to me that you know, a company can just say, well, there's a problem, and you just have to wait. Is there not any way we can look at this in terms of redress?
I mean, I think that, my understanding is that it was so significant, the issue they were facing, and of a nature that it couldn't be put right without significant investment from them. And that took time, and certainly the tenants suffered a lot during that period, but there were things put in place to try and address it during that time. I don't have the information, so I'll go any further into that, but I think that what you've said could be taken away and looked at in terms of how we manage our relationship or the situation with large partners who suffer a significant outage as they had. So that's something that could be.
We can specifically on this issue, then that they are partners and they cooperate with us. They're not, wouldn't actually be obliged to cooperate with us at all, and so they do. And I think what Kevin is saying is that they had a significant issue which prevented them from prioritising this for a period of time, and they are now back in cooperative mode. So we have no legal powers to force them to cooperate or to penalise them if they're slower than we want them to be.
And if I could just add to that, it's not a place of where cooperation was refused. It's a case where the actions that they needed to do to be able to progress some of these cases, they just couldn't do. So that meant that they weren't able to, because of the issues they had, to issue the necessary or prepare the necessary notices. So that's the level they had. It's not a refusal to cooperate. It's just the issue was such that that area of work couldn't be progressed.
Well, just for the record, this seems to be a modus operandi of Clarion, that something goes wrong, you know, and they're very seemingly cooperative. You know, I can say this, many others can't. Seemingly cooperative and explain what all their problems are. But it seems to me, and I mean, I'm not saying this with any in-depth knowledge, to get away with it. It's like when you have a problem with any authority, they start to tell you the problems, and you know, it's stock response, and I think it's a fairly straightforward response. But that's not my problem; that's your problem, and you need to fix it. So I'd appreciate, Chair, if there was some way we could look at whether we get some kind of redress. You know, I know that maybe the suspicion is if we get a bit funny with them, they'll be a bit, you know, bit less cooperative. But I have to say, I think I would be speaking for the tenants who are people who interface with Clarion. They're not exactly cooperative with the tenants. And it seems to be, on what we just heard tonight, is they're not very cooperative with us. And I'm all very well, they've got big problems and all the rest of it. But I just feel that, you know, we should look at whether we have some kind of redress, or even, have we had a letter of apology from them?
I don't know whether we've had a letter, but certainly they were apologetic. It was an IT issue, and as Kevin said, they just couldn't physically process the things they needed to process while this was happening.
But have they apologized to us?
And I don't know whether they've actually said sorry, but they were.
Well, I'd like an apology, to be honest with you. I don't think it's enough to say. You know, it's a stock response when you interface with organizations. Oh, I've got all these problems and that's why I can't do it. But as a minimum, I think we should have some kind of apology for the delay. I appreciate what you're saying. They might have had all these issues. But, you know, that's their problem, not our problem. So I think we maybe look at whether the possibility that we get some kind of letter from them. Just the way, that, you know, the way the stories you pick up anecdotally and from other councillors, you know, they seem to think if you have something on a notice board, everything's tickety-boo, as long as you say there's a problem and this, and this. So I have to say, I'm not happy with it. We haven't had any kind of apology off them.
Can I suggest that a way forward in this might be to have a high level meeting to discuss the lessons learned from it and an outcome from that meeting that would then say a way forward for the future. That may involve an apology. It may involve an acknowledgement that there was an unavoidable situation that could not be resolved.
Yeah, I think an explanation border on an apology would be
Yes.
fine.
Okay, thank you. We take that forward then outside the meeting.
Pressing the wrong button, no wonder. I'm just thinking about Clarion. I wonder whether it was a cyber attack or whether they just don't have very good IT systems, in which case, if it was a cyber attack, then I guess maybe that was something a bit beyond their control. I wanted to ask you on the subject of the fraud. You've got 81 applications withdrawn. Now, I think we know that these 81 applications were in fact dead people. Can you just confirm that?
I believe the majority of those were.
I
So
believe they were.
this is not. I'm not sure whether it's all of them. So let's just say that these come out of the work with the National Fraud Initiative. So there's data matching. One of the data sets they do use is against the registered deceased persons and people on waiting who are on our waiting lists. So yeah, that could be it. Or
Last time, I think we had a discussion about this, and there were 81 dead people to be taken off the list. The reason I'm bringing that up is because you've claimed £262,000 worth of benefits as a result of taking 81 dead people off the waiting list. What benefits actually would have been achieved by doing that?
I do understand your point. These notional values are something that have been set by the National Fraud Initiative, and we've just used those as a multiplier. I agree with you that figure itself is not what I believe to be. It's not a fair reflection of what fraud would be. Part of the work that with the creation of the Public Sector Fraud Authority, there's a big drive this year in terms of fraud risk measurement, and we'll be looking at recalculating some of these costs. There is the notional value that we use for recovered housing property. Work has been done on that last year, and I'll be looking to introduce that value. And that work is one that very much focuses upon the notional saving being the cost of someone being placed in temporary accommodation. And that's the cost to the council revenue fund. I haven't got anything planned at the moment over those housing applications, but it's something I could take up and take away.
Yeah, I wonder if you might like to consider replacing that number with 0.
Yes.
And the other question I wanted to ask you was on. Oh, sorry, our page numbers are all over the place, aren't they? But in mine it's 113. I think yours are 8 different, maybe 105. And it shows the figures for each year. And then you see 103, 147, 179. Looks like a big increase year on year. But if you look on the previous page, it says the 179 actually is 141 new cases and 38 old cases from the previous year. So it's not 179 new cases, it's 141 new cases. So I wanted just first of all to confirm that I've understood that correctly.
Yes, you have. Those are the cases that have been worked on in the year. So there will always be some cases that will be span across years.
So have you counted them in both years?
In terms of reported stats, then yes, they would be, because they were a case that was worked on in the previous year and worked on in the following year.
But that's very misleading, isn't it? If you've counted it in both years, that inflates the number of cases.
It's something I can look at. It is the way we our case management system works to produce those numbers. So,
But it
and I
needs-
think
it
that's
needs to be-
why the explanation, as you said earlier on, we do try to make it clear of how many are actually new cases in year. So that's why that note is put on there.
Well, I think when it says total referrals in period, we ought to be talking about new referrals
So,
in order to understand the trend of what's going
Yeah.
on.
so it says referrals that are worked on in the period. It doesn't say they are new referrals.
so
So
if
I can clarify that.
So if it took you 3 years, you counted 3 times.
I think probably this could be addressed by the narrative that goes in
Yeah.
there, because the figures are, we need to know how many have been worked on. So, but then the narrative just needs to have that or a note with it. Maybe
Well,
they'll describe that.
I would suggest that the note should say that certain items have been worked on over more than 1 year, but the figures should just tell you the new items for that particular year. So that you can understand the trend of the amount of fraud that you're discovering, not how long you're taking to deal with it, but how much is actually coming to light.
If I could, that's something I'll try and take away and see how I can adjust that. Whether I can do it that way or whether within that table I make it clear that of that total, how many are. So when it talks about referrals in period, I'd have the ones that we carry forward and reduce that number down so you can see the true number of new cases that are opened.
All right.
Because there are some, we will count a referral in the stats that could have come through on the 30th of March and it's logged on the system. We will not have done any work on it. And I see, that's why I do get your point that it counts twice, but I'll just to see how I can best present that so
All
it
right.
is meaningful for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, I have a follow-up question on sort of Councillor Oliver's first point, which is, so I'm looking at table 3 and where it says develop joint working with housing teams to proactively identify housing fraud. And then on the far side, actual, it says 81 applications withdrawn. That isn't 81 fraudulent applications. What that is 81 people passed away while waiting on the housing list, and they're included in a report as if they were attempting fraud. Is that correct?
For here for Merton, yes, that is correct. But what's the
I think that is very poor.
the bulk of this is come from, let's say, it's the data matching done by the National Fraud Initiative. If people are left on a waiting list, the way the systems work across most authorities, people are assessed when they apply. They are then checked when they get to a position of an offer. If there is a name on there and that goes out to a household, someone may then choose to impersonate that person and continue with that application. Now, I know you say that might
Is
seem
that
a little
what happened in
unbelievable.
this 81 cases?
No, that's not what's happening in this at all. I do agree with you there that this work here that's not fraud work. It's not difficult work for us. We do have housing application fraud where it is a case of where we've gone through some applications and we find and identify false statements on those applications and work on those. That's not the case here.
So
But it does-
so then, sorry to interrupt. So then when it says housing applications withdrawn as a result of fraud work, I mean, that's not fraud work. That's just removing people who have
Yep.
died from the waiting list, which is just administrative work. And I think if some of those people found out they were on this list, they would be absolutely appalled.
I agree with that from both perspectives. I mean, one of the with the National Fraud Initiative, it's perhaps you should say it shouldn't be on them to have highlighted these issues. They should be picked up elsewhere. They haven't. It's only because of this every 2-year data matching exercise that happens that these are identified and are fed back to authorities to actually adjust. Not all authorities will adjust them. I have issues elsewhere where I'm trying to get people to actually just take on board and do what authorities are required to do to make sure that their records are as correct and as accurate as they possibly can be. But it's in terms of the fraud work, it is the work that's gone into it is the teams, the service itself in producing the extract file, the work that's gone into the authority pays for in terms of the processing through the National Fraud Initiative to come up with these. As for fraud, no, I'm not, I can't defend that. I agree with you here. It's
I appreciate your team is doing the work, but we have to be a bit sharper on reporting than that, because, you know, that's not the right characterization, you know, of this. And I appreciate for your metrics, you want to report, you know, what your area of the council is doing, and you want to flag the activities your area is doing and the work you're putting in, the outcomes you're getting. But we can't describe people who passed away in the housing, you know, waiting list as then being withdrawn under a fraud report. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
The narrative, I mean, some of these were, I'm trying to get to grips with what the nature of someone in that category could be, that someone who had applied, we're investigating them to see whether it's a fraudulent application and in that period they die, or is it because of lack of response, or how is it in why was it in that category in the first place, that application?
So within the data matching, one of the reports or areas that the data set is matched against is the list of deceased persons.
Right.
Another one is matched against people who've obtained housing, be it within Merton or in other authorities, and those are flagged as well. So, but the problem is that people will human nature is if there's a need for something thereafter, they will keep you up to date and of any changes in circumstances that is going to be something that leads to an outcome for them. If they've found and have been offered a place, they believe that's now sorted, but their waiting list record is still live and still current. Not here, but I have elsewhere across the partnership where we have had someone who has been offered a property, accepted that, then got another offer through because they were on the waiting list, and they accepted that as well. So that in here, as I understand, I think that those have come from the match against the deceased person. So I agree all of that. I'm just saying that the matching that happens isn't just to deceased persons. There are other matches in there, and those are ones that I think you may find that some of those are more acceptable to be included. The deceased persons, you want that removed. So I'll take that on board.
Okay, thank you. If there are other questions, can we note the report? Okay, thank you. Item 9. Moving forward to item 9. Why is it 9 here? I'm just looking at my report. Okay. What I'd like to make a suggestion to the committee that we go for a cross-party working group to consider the honorary alderman, and they can review that and report back in November. I suggest there's no great urgency because this happens largely every 4 years when the annual council meeting happens. So there's no great time pressure on that. We'd like some considerable work on it. When it comes to B, in order that I don't have to recuse myself from the meeting as a former leader of the council, I'd like to suggest that maybe that they could take that on board as well, and that be considered and come back to the November meeting. So it's complete. So we don't make a decision on either tonight, but we look for a group to look at that, and we ask the group leaders to nominate rather than us, as we're a committee that's just about to be reformed in the new on the 17th of May. That we ask group leaders to nominate the membership of that. Outside the meeting, so that is it agreed in principle that we include B in the first part so that I can stay chairing, or should I leave and hand over to John to chair the item? Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Councillor.
I agree with your suggestion. I think that's the way we should go forward. But in that, could we look at all awards that are being awarded and have it looking at everything. So we have a policy around that and the criteria for awarding these awards.
I think that's a good idea. I'm aware that the deputy leader in terms of civic pride is looking at other community awards that and maybe in the round that this working group needs to refer to whatever's going on there, because I think that in the end, if the borough is going to recognise service, not so much for the elected members, but if the borough is going to recognise service, there needs to be open access to that nomination process, and it needs to be transparent and fair across the borough. So I think it needs to take account of what the deputy leader is looking at in terms of civic awards, because it is a civic award, honorary free person of the borough. So I suppose I declared a partial interest by saying that there may be something that would involve me, but I think by pushing it aside to another group that I won't be involved in, it's a good path. Is that generally agreed? And that maybe that group should be 3111. So three Labour, 1 Liberal, 1 Conservative, 1 Independent.
Light on the Liberal side. How about 3-2-1?
That seems a bit light on the independence. I assume you're meaning that it will be 1
I don't see
Conservative.
any independents here.
But no, it's not a subcommittee of this meeting. It's a cross-party working group. I'm suggesting it doesn't have to, and it's not governed by proportionality in that way, but it's if you have a strong feeling on that, if there's a very strong feeling on it.
Well, just sort of maths, if it's based on sort of council groups, it'd be 3, 2, 1, and then like 0.1 or something. Independent.
Well, I think that, yes, it's rather like families having 2.4 children. Yes, it's 0.4. Well, it's not, working groups are not governed by the proportionality requirements the subcommittees and committees are.
So we can have an extra one. Yeah, 1-1-1.
I'm in the hands of the committee. I've proposed a number of 3-1-1-1, but if it's suggested it should be 3-2-1. And it's for maybe the other parties to speak, not to put pressure on the independents, but the independents may not be able to take up their position, so therefore to agree an arrangement.
That sounds like a reasonable compromise.
Yes, because I think we have to bear in mind that there's another one that I'm going to be suggesting that we have a working group, but they may not be able to staff it from all the groups. So, okay. So it's 3-1-1-1.
3-1-1-1, but let's put the next part.
But if the independents choose group to, or one group chooses to offer its place to someone else, then that's for them to do. But clearly in our anti-bullying policy, we have no pressure put on that.
The only person that they can offer their place to is the Democrats. It would be ridiculous to have.
That would seem to make sense, but it's for people to choose who they do that to.
Okay. So have a word with them.
Yes. Okay. So is that, so we're putting that to that group there. Okay. We have another so item 10, we've had a suggestion for someone to be given freedom of the borough, and the normal process there is that there would be a small working group to look at that and sift through that proposal and bring back to this committee. That one, because it's a live and an active one, that's more pressing. That should come back to the next committee. But I put my hand in that, put it in the hands of the committee of how that works and how many people should be on that small working group to consider it. It may be that it only needs to be 3 people.
Can it not be the same group?
It could be, but that other group might get sidelined by this one when actually they've got quite a substantial piece of work to do to come back in November. But if it was the wish of the committee that's as a priority, that group deal with that first and then carry on.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think otherwise you might have 2 kind of divergent opinions.
And it could be, it actually, that's a good point, because it could inform that group in terms of the evidence or no statements that are coming forward. So, but we give that group two remits. One is to make a recommendation back to this committee in its meeting, I think is July, to say whether or not that person should be put forward to the council for freedom of the borough, and the longer term work in terms of the process review of honorary aldermen, and taking all that into account, and the nomination of honorary freeman, free person, and other civic awards. Although clearly that group won't have a say in the other civic awards because that's been worked on elsewhere, but it needs to be consistent and joined up with that. Is that a clear enough brief? Okay, thank you. So that's dealt with 9 and 10. We're getting through them slightly faster. The next one is a remuneration of councillors report, which we have here before us.
We'll have a financial interest in that.
Yeah, so we all declare that, but I think that's also should, we're not going to be deciding that. There are options here. We consider the independent one, we consider set up a working group, or just accept an uplift. I think that we need to have some work done on that outside, and that needs to be worked on. And that needs to be a 3111 with that same proviso.
What's the basis of that split?
It's keeping it small and manageable, I think, is why I'm suggesting that sort of number. And it's not inconsistent with some of the working groups that happened elsewhere, as I understand. If we make it any larger, is it going to be achieved? Is it going to achieve its work?
Well, obvious question would be why 3 Labour and then 1 from each of the other parties? What's the logic behind that?
We came to a compromise on the previous one that maybe that should be the same sort of arrangement there then.
Well, because if you did it by the way that things like this committee are set up, then it's done in sort of proportion to the size of the groups. But you're proposing for this that we don't use that proportionality, that's all. So I was just asking on what basis?
I think that working groups don't normally follow a proportion, don't have to.
I guess the obvious question is why 3 Labour then? Why not one of each, one person from each party?
Well, I think what this group will need to report back is both the recommendations and almost also a minority report, if you like. So all its considerations needs to be reported back to the committee, so that the committee as a whole can then make the decision. And I'm throwing that out there as a number.
Mind if there's sort of a good reason, but I don't see it, that why we have proportionality for most of our stuff, but then for these working groups, you want to move away from that.
Well, if it's 6 people on there, then even under the proportionality rules, there will be 3 Labour. In fact, it might be, in using the decimal points that you said earlier, it might be more than that. In fact, it would be more than that. Out of 6.
31.
No, I'm meaning if 6 if there were out of 57 councillors, which there is in total, 6 57ths of the total. So you take 6 57ths of each group. That's the maths teacher in me coming out. So if you take 31 times 6 over 57, it's slightly more than 3.
Clearly, there's going to be a bit of rounding involved.
And so the rounding
would be 17 out of 57, which would be 2
times 3. So you're suggesting a 3-2-1 split because the small number of independents.
Or 3-2-1-1 if you want to, if you feel the independents should be included.
It makes it 7 then.
Is 7 so much worse than 6?
I'm fairly flexible on it, really. I thought I was throwing
Working
forward.
group, so I mean, it doesn't decide anything.
I mean, to clear things up then, you know, on that one, we can have obviously 4 Labour, 2 Lib Dem, 1 resident and 1 Conservative.
4211. But it
This is going to be. And this particular topic is, we know it's going to be a sensitive one, so I support Martin's proposal.
it's what I'm envisaging this group will bring to the committee for the committee to fully debate and take into account everything that's been raised, and the decision will be made at this committee to put it forward to council. And then council will make a decision. So this is not a decision making, this is a working group to come up with the options. If it's going to be, it could be that not everyone wants to take up their place on there.
So if we go 4211, and then some groups say we don't want to take up our place, then that's fair enough.
Okay, 4211. A working group of 8 max.
I mean, from my perspective, as the person who's probably going to provide the secretariat, that's a manageable number, and
Right.
some people may turn up.
Okay.
There's probably be quite a few meetings. Not everybody will be at every one. Some people will be more vocal than others. So from my perspective, that's absolutely
Okay,
fine.
that's fine. Thank you. Thank you for raising it, and it's always good to be challenged, so I appreciate that. Now, the working, there are items in here to be considered,
Chair,
obviously, sorry.
Be clear, what we've just agreed, because I'm not clear.
We've only partially agreed, because I'm also going to talk now about setting up the ratio. We've agreed 4 Labour, 2 Liberal, 1 Conservative, 1 Independent. As a working group.
That gives you the potential of time. It's not a decision making, I get that, but in subcommittees, I'm not going back on a decision, but that gives you a split then. And it's not an odd number. So the potential. Yeah. Okay, just to be clear, because I know we all say it's not decision making. I understand that. But in committee structure terms, you've got the potential there of a split vote, even though there isn't a vote. I get that. But I'm quite happy with Martin's 5. Always best to have odd numbers on committees.
I mean, I have a fear of even numbers, I must admit, but I think that given that the report that will come forward from this group will be completely for this committee to decide the outcome. So as long as when it's reporting, it says that the recommendation is that every councillor gets £100,000 a year, and it won't. And one person on the committee agreed with that, or one of the group, and 5 disagreed. But whatever it comes through, it gives a scale of support for each suggestion. But I think that we might find there's more consensus that we're thinking, we anticipate on this. No, I think that 4211 is a reasonable. I suggest that. Okay. Thank
Just to
you.
be clear on that, what's the timescale for that?
Well, I'm just going to go on to talk a bit now about what I think. This needs to work quickly and to report back for July, because it needs to be going through from here to full council at some point soon. It has a remit already to look at as the paper talks about, the sort of taking account of what other councils are doing, the review of London councils that happened. But I'd like to suggest 1 or 2 other things that it also includes in its review. One is, and I know that that we are not eligible to be part of the local government pension scheme, but I would like this. I suggest that this group also looks at how it can promote or consider investigating the type of pension arrangements that could exist for councillors. It would be at no cost to the local authority. It would have to be a total sort of own investment, but it's just in terms of recommending, it could be something like the Nest pension scheme or whatever, but, and I don't want to prejudge what it will be, but I think that it will be useful to have this working group looking at pension provision, because some people do sacrifice some of their working life to be councillors, and their long-term financial stability suffers as a result of that. That if there could be a tax efficient way of doing that, people have the choice of doing that anyway. I know you can take out voluntary pension, but it's just looking at that voluntarily. The other is, and I know that there are legal restrictions on this in terms of what we can do because we're not MPs. But in terms of looking at when someone loses office or loses a position, the financial hits they take there, whether there's anything that can be done to support councillors who are in a position, it could be the leader of the opposition group, who suddenly then is not the leader of the opposition group. Is there a wind down or anything there that could happen? So there's not saying it has to come up with it, but can it consider as part of its remit as well, those items? Welcome any other suggestions that may come along from that, and also whether we invite the 2 independent members to be part of that working group. I should have said that at the beginning as well, because that may give a bit of an outside view of. No, they wouldn't. It's to be an observer role, really. I mean, it's just opening up to one of those 2 maybe being on it if they wish to.
I think, Chair, that's a good idea. At some point, having one of the independent members, because obviously this would be quite a sensitive topic. So having that independent view, I think, would be very useful in some capacity, whether that's at this committee or, in the working group.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And then alongside that, something that's bothered me for a number of years, and I've been on the council now for 21 years, I think altogether, or no, 19 years altogether, is that employers seem to be, there is a tendency perhaps that employers are less supportive of staff that are elected as councillors. And I think it will be quite useful if and I've spoken to Louise about this, but whether the chief executive could be putting together a pack that goes to employers after an election and says, congratulations, a member of your staff has been elected as member of Merton Council. This is the role of a councillor. This is the sort of training they're going to get in the role and the support they'll be getting in the role. Is there anything you can do as an employer to support this person as a councillor? And maybe including in that some examples of what employers do, some employers do, as part of their corporate social responsibility in supporting. So that's not for councillors to be working on, but that's to ask the chief executive to come forward and report at that same meeting in July what could be done to support. Because I worked for a number of employers as a councillor. Some have been very supportive, and others have seen it as a problem. And I think that to give that support to individual elected members would be something that could be a benefit, and because I don't think a lot of employers know just how much training and personal development being a councillor gives to their staff. Is that agreed as well? Sorry.
Yeah. One comment, if I may, and that is there's another report due this year from the IRP. Are we to take account of that?
Yeah, I think so. They're aiming to publish the final version by September, but there should be a draft available in June. I don't expect it'll be very startlingly different from the existing one, but it will be good to at least have sight of it before you make your final recommendations, at least in draft form.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the pack's a very good idea. Well, I think that should be given. I think the process should be, I know we haven't developed it yet, should be, this is what's going to be sent to your employer. We've got to be a bit, I don't mean it, make it a secret society or something like that, but people need to be aware, both one in terms that we're telling their employer, that's obviously, that's point one. And point two, sort of like pointing out what maybe a summary of what the act is about time off and things like that, because you're right, Mike, it's a very uneven, right, Chair? It's a very uneven, some are sympathetic, some are not. And the other thing I'd like to maybe, I don't know whether this would be too much work for the committee, is that, if you like, the conditions of being a councillor. You know, we've been quite good in the first year, but I think we drift into sometimes meetings going on till 11:30 and it's the worst way to make a decision. I know sometimes it's unavoidable, but you know, just a general, maybe taking a few bits of information for newer councillors. You know, I've found it fit as a new councillor fairly reasonable, but sometimes there's a little bit when it happens in a lot of institutions. Oh, you know, sort of, I wouldn't say delight, but people outright smiled about people who are bumping into everything metaphorically in the council. So maybe a pack that goes to the employer, we'd be telling the employer, and a little Janet and John guide to being a councillor. Okay, thanks.
And we all get a welcome pack straight after the election, and that's the sort of thing I think that could be in there. And I think that maybe the nature shouldn't be an automatic sending. It should be in the welcome pack to say this can be sent to your employer if you so wish. And so that will be a supportive way there. But I think in terms of the way we our working arrangements, that's a wider review that I think needs to be looked at, because maybe we need to take into account those, and it's not too late now to look at those who left last year, because there were councillors on all sides who chose to stand down after one term, and it will be quite useful to capture why that was, a bit like an exit interview almost. Maybe we can't do it retrospectively, but maybe we could do that in future. Look when people are standing down, and that will help inform our working arrangements. But hopefully we could pick it up before. But I do agree with the late night meetings, so I'm going to move on fairly quickly. We're not going to be like planning last night. Okay, thank you for that. So we've got a way forward on item 11. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Number 12. Item 12, and I would ask Louise to take us through the changes to the constitution that are proposed.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully some of these are self-explanatory. The first recommendation that we're asking you to consider making to council is just to amend the terms of reference for the Pensions Committee to make it explicit that they are the body responsible for signing off the accounts insofar as they relate to the council's pension arrangements. The second ask is to tidy up the constitution effectively to remove references to Chas Limited, now that is no longer part of the council's structure. And thirdly, to make changes to the constitution where the constitution refers to the current director structure, in light of the fact that we've moved now to 6 executive directors with different titles from the directors who were previously in post. So we just need to make sure the constitution refers to the right executive director in the right place. The aspect of the report that's a little bit more complicated relates to the procedures that are in place in a number of parts of the constitution relating to the payment of termination, the making of termination payments to officers. At the moment, there's some inconsistency in the approach taken in the pay policy and in the appointments committee terms of reference, and in the terms of reference of this committee. So what I'm suggesting is that we make some necessary changes so that were there to be a suggestion of a termination payment being made, the responsibility for making that decision, provided the payment were less than £100,000, should sit with the appointments committee. And that's because in practice, the appointments committee is the body that deals with staff or chief officer recruitment, terms and conditions, dismissal and disciplinary action for senior officers. And if that were to be agreed, there was a secondary question, which is at what level of payment should that matter go to members as opposed to being delegated to the chief executive. There is statutory guidance, which I've included a link to in the report, issued by the Secretary of State about how these matters should be handled. And their recommendation in the guidance is that for payments below £100,000, it's reasonable to delegate the decision to the Chief Executive, unless, of course, it relates to the Chief Executive. So the options are set out in the report, either to leave the status quo as it is, which is that for a Chief Officer, it has to go to the Appointments Committee, regardless of value, or to allow delegated authority for £50,000 or less to the chief executive, or indeed for less than £100,000 to the chief executive, always bearing in mind that the statutory guidance requires any payment of £100,000 or more to be approved by full council in any event. And then the final aspect of the report is to suggest we amend the employment procedure rules to remove the requirement for the monitoring officer appointment to be made by full council. That's not a statutory requirement. We don't do it for the section 151 officer, and so that could be delegated down to the appointments committee. If you were not minded to do that, then I am asking for a separate recommendation in relation to the monitoring officer for this forthcoming appointment, because I think it's common knowledge now amongst councillors that I will be leaving Merton at the end of July, and we're in the process of recruiting my successor, and that if his or her appointment had to go to full council, we'd miss doing it in sufficient time to allow a minimum amount of handover between me and the successor. So I would be asking that the annual council delegate authority to the appointments committee to select the individual, albeit they will need to approve the remuneration package, which is over £100,000. I think I covered everything, but happy to answer any questions.
For that, and thank you for your service. I know that you'll still be here in July for the meeting, so there'll be a longer opportunity to talk then. But are there any questions on any items there we've had summarised, or comments?
Well, the first one is a question just on A. Am I right in understanding that ultimately the accounts are signed off by this committee, and so there'll be kind of a prior sign off for the pensions element by the pensions committee, and then it would have to be signed off here as well?
I think I'll ask the National to come in, because it was the auditors who raised it, that it's actually the pensions committee does the pension fund, and this committee does everything else. But in practice, they both come here, as they have both come tonight for information, but the formal decision-making process should be pension committee for pension and SGP for everything else. But Namasha, have I got that right?
Councillor Oliver is correct, because pension committee used to be a advisory panel up until July 2021, but since then now it's a decision-making body, so the pension committee can approve the pension fund accounts and the annual report. So that's the reason the auditors, when we said that they were not happy to submit that to the pension committee because they couldn't see that particular line that they can approve on the terms of reference. Hence the reason we are making that amendment to the terms of reference, that the pension fund accounts and the annual report can be approved by the pension committee.
The other comment I wanted to make was just with respect to item C. You've given us some choices, haven't you? And I rather liked, find them. I rather like the option where any payment of benefits over and above the statutory or contractual should be considered by the appointments committee. So that would be option C. I don't think it happens very often, does it?
It hardly ever happens. And that would be the status quo.
Yeah, so I would suggest we leave it as it is.
Does anyone else have any comments or preference for any of the options that are there? Okay, then let's agree that under item C that we go for option C. Am I saying that correctly? Yes, okay. On the rest of the report, any other comments or? Okay, are the recommendations therefore agreed? Yeah, great.
Sorry, was there a choice on point D to do it? No, sorry. Which one am I talking about? Point E. Louise was saying we can do it sort of in perpetuity, allow that to happen, or just for this one-off instance. So we need to make a decision about which of those.
Right.
I'm happy to do it as a one-off instance myself.
Yes, so the recommendation is the in perpetuity recommendation, but the option I explained would be a one-off. That's a matter for this committee to choose.
And, okay, I mean, it means that we would get a handover and it would go smoothly now, hopefully, providing that a suitable candidate can be found. And then we probably will receive a report back, because hopefully any replacement monitoring officer would not be leaving in the near future. So that could be then reviewed in future. Is that agreed then? Is a one-off? Right, okay, thank you.
So, sorry, just to be clear, so you were agreeing a one-off recommendation on this occasion,
Yes.
but to leave the actual constitution provision as it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I think that concludes item 12. We're clear on that. Item 13, we have the annual.
There's no 13.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a supplementary, wasn't it? No?
Was the one that was removed and moved to July.
It's an unlucky number. We don't do that.
Oh, right. Well, that's true, yes. This was removed. So 14 is the member complaints. We got through slightly faster than I thought we were, but on to the penultimate item, yes. We're asked to note it initially, consider whether there should be any absolute prohibition of the inclusion of links to external social media accounts in emails sent by councillors.
So Chair, could I ask a question on what that
Yes.
means? So like, if I wanted to send, if we agree this and I wanted to send a link to the Twitter page of the Wimbledon Guild, you know, something nothing to do with us, that would be forbidden.
Mhm.
It's a very good question. The wrong it's intended to correct is around party political links. So people
Yeah, and I think
look to their local party Facebook or their own personal Twitter, which is much more political than their council one would be.
that sounds very reasonable, saying you can't use your council email to send out your, you know, party political Facebook page or whatever, but to say you can't do any links to external social media, you know, there's lots of voluntary organizations, or even the council has a Twitter page, so we would be forbidden from linking to the council's.
So you're concerned with the inadvertent.
Yeah, I think it's drafted too broadly. I understand the point and I agree with the aim of it, but I think that the drafting is probably not right there.
I understand that's the dilemma, I suppose, just thinking aloud. The problem with attaching a link yourself is you can then be associated with it. So unless you're absolutely clear that what's on that website you are happy to be associated with, it's probably safer not to do that, even though it's not about a party political issue, which is what this report is designed to address. But again,
Even the council's own social media accounts.
wouldn't be an external social media account, though, would it? That would be the
Oh,
council's
good, you've got
social
me on that
media
one.
account.
But what about just websites which aren't really social media?
The prohibition ought to be on anything that's a link to a party political, whether it's a social media account or website, Facebook page. That's what this report is initially about. I absolutely take the point about you might want to include something else on occasion to promote, you know, a charitable fundraising event or anything similar. And I don't suppose that's not what this is designed to address. So if we wanted to have clarity to amend the recommendation to make that clear, then we can absolutely do that, to make this prohibition about party political social media accounts and indeed websites or any other material.
Personal social media accounts.
Yeah.
Councillors have some councillors have a Twitter account that says councillor Mike Brunt or whatever, but also a personal one that's not saying you're a councillor.
Yeah, I would caution against that. If it's your councillor accounts, then it ought not to be party political because you're doing it in your capacity as a councillor. If it's your personal account, I would not link that to your council work. I would keep those, apart from anything else, you then get into territory about complaints being made that you've posted something inappropriate, and it'd be very hard for you to argue that it wasn't being done in your capacity as a councillor if you'd put a link to it on your councillor email address. So I would absolutely, for different reasons, caution against doing that. But this is about links to, and if your personal Twitter account happens to be very party political, then absolutely it would fall foul of this prohibition.
do we need to, because it may be, as you raised the point of Women of Guild perhaps, but someone might be putting on polka theatre, social media or Women Theatre. So should we say politically, not necessarily party political social media accounts, personal or political social media accounts?
I think if we say external social media or accounts or websites which contain party political content, that
Right.
probably covers it.
Okay. Is that an agreed amended wording that clarifies it? It's always within the scope of this committee to review complaints, because if anyone does anything that gets around that in another way, then it will come back here consideration. So thank you. So we've noted the complaints, we've amended that, and we're asking the monitoring officer to write to all councillors to remind them of the need to take care in using social resources. So I mean, that goes along with that. That'll be a way of informing councillors of this decision, in effect. Yes. So is there any other comment on this report? Are we agreed? Right. Okay, thank you. As amended. Right. The work programme, which is at the end, when I was looking at this before, and I had the opportunity to talk to John, I think the only amendments need to be now that we have the remuneration report coming back to the July committee. That's not June, that should be July, I think. And the awards coming back to November, the honorary alderman, and but also there will be a report coming back, a first report, interim report in July about the particular nomination for honorary freeman coming back there. So we need to build those into the work plan. Are there any, looking ahead at the work plan, is there anyone got any suggestions?
Just that we said we were going to haul up in front of the committee some of these people who don't do their internal audit
Yes,
improvements. So just that could take some time.
it could. So maybe that should be September.
Well, no, I don't think we should leave it any longer. I think
All right, I'm just thinking of the volume of work on the
but we
small
weren't going to do
committee.
that this time, weren't we?
Yes.
That should have been done today, so I think it should be next time.
Right,
Maybe something else could wait.
okay. That agrees then? Yes. Mhm. Oh, sorry, can I take Councillor Wilson first? Councillor Wilson, sorry for not seeing you there.
That's okay. I just wondered, do we review the member inquiries process at all, sort of in this committee?
We could.
We don't, but absolutely we could. We're in the process of reviewing it internally at officer level anyway, and trying to, well, not trying to, we're going to put an automated process in place as opposed to the way in which it's managed at the moment, which is on a series of spreadsheets. We're hoping to have that in place by June or July. So if you did want to have a discussion about it, this committee, I would suggest the September meeting, give it a chance to bed in.
Yeah, I personally really welcome that, actually.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good point. We'll bring that to September. Any other comments? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I can see a few items related to the account and statement of account. Now we heard from the auditors, they are going to start the audit in October. So I'm not too sure how to move it around as at now, but I'll update it as it goes.
It may be that we have to consider moving the date of the November meeting to reflect that. If we're just going to miss, something's coming, we're expecting a couple of weeks after, but that's for the committee membership to decide, I think, later on. But thank you for raising that. It's a good point. Okay, I think that we have got to the end. Thank you very much. And with 2 hours, 5 minutes, I think it's a slight improvement on some of my earlier ones, but thank you very much for your attendance.